Some people grow up with someone always standing behind them, someone who notices when they're about to make the wrong decision, offers advice before they lose their way, and reminds them not to give up when life becomes difficult. Then there are those who eventually look around and realize none of that was ever there for them. Every setback had to be endured alone. Every important decision had to be made without guidance. Every victory had to be earned without applause. After enough time, it's easy to mistake that silence for proof that life has given everyone else an advantage. The Stoics saw something different. They believed the moment life stops carrying you is often the moment it finally begins shaping you into someone capable of carrying yourself. The hardest truth to accept is that support can make you comfortable, but comfort rarely makes you stronger. Stoicism teaches that the person who learns to remain steady without constant encouragement, without recognition, and without someone always pointing the way, develops a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away. When your confidence no longer depends on who believes in you, your direction becomes much harder for other people to influence. The road may feel lonelier than everyone else's, but it offers something rare: the opportunity to build a strength that belongs entirely to you. Most people spend years believing they are falling behind because no one is helping them. Yet the strongest foundation is never built on constant reassurance. It is built by learning to govern your own mind when reassurance never arrives. The moment you stop measuring your life by who stands beside you and begin measuring it by who you become in moments of solitude, everything begins to change. What once felt like loneliness slowly becomes freedom. What once seemed like a disadvantage quietly becomes the greatest advantage you never knew you possessed. At first, that idea seems almost impossible to accept. Most people naturally assume success belongs to those with the strongest support system. They believe progress depends on encouragement, opportunity, or having the right people appear at the right time. It feels reasonable because that is the story we hear everywhere. We are taught that confidence comes from praise, that courage comes from being understood, and that the right circumstances arrive before meaningful change begins. So when those things are missing, it becomes easy to believe life has placed you at a permanent disadvantage. Over time, that belief becomes something much deeper than a passing thought. It quietly shapes the way you see yourself and the choices you make. You hesitate before taking risks because you are waiting for reassurance. You postpone difficult decisions because you hope confidence will arrive first. You convince yourself that the next opportunity, the next conversation, or the next piece of encouragement will finally be enough to begin. Without realizing it, you stop building your future and start waiting for permission to build it. Days become months, months become years. The life you imagined never feels any closer because the conditions you are waiting for remain outside your control. This is exactly where Stoicism offers a radically different way of seeing the world. It does not deny that support is valuable. It simply refuses to believe that support is the source of strength. The Stoics recognized this pattern long before the modern world gave it different names. They understood that dependence often wears the mask of hope. It feels harmless to expect reassurance from those around you, but every expectation carries an invisible cost. The more your peace depends on another person's approval, the less control you have over your own mind. If your confidence rises only when someone praises you, then it never truly belonged to you. It was borrowed, and borrowed things can always be taken away. This is why Stoicism places such extraordinary value on inner authority. Not because support is unimportant, and not because relationships lack meaning, but because the strongest foundation cannot be built upon something that exists outside your own character. External support is unpredictable. It appears, it disappears, it changes. Sometimes it never comes at all. Character is different. It is built through small choices repeated until they become part of who you are. The Stoic does not reject help when it arrives. Instead, they refuse to make their ability to move forward dependent upon it. There is a profound difference between appreciating support and requiring it. One creates gratitude, the other creates quiet captivity. Few people notice how deeply this dependence shapes their identity because it hides inside ordinary thoughts. They postpone applying for opportunities because they fear rejection without someone encouraging them first. They delay learning new skills because nobody believes in their potential. They abandon meaningful goals because recognition comes too slowly. None of these decisions seem dramatic on their own. Together they create a life built on permission instead of conviction. Every delay reinforces the same message: I cannot continue until something outside me changes. Eventually that message stops being a passing thought and becomes an identity. The person no longer sees themselves as capable of leading their own life. They become someone waiting to be chosen, waiting to be validated, waiting to be rescued from uncertainty. Yet uncertainty has never asked for permission before entering anyone's life. It arrives without warning, indifferent to whether we feel prepared. The Stoics understood this with remarkable clarity. They believed postponing responsibility because conditions were imperfect only strengthened fear. Every avoided decision quietly trained the mind to avoid the next one as well. In time, dependence does more than delay progress. It teaches helplessness until hesitation no longer feels like fear. It simply feels like who you are. Life interrupts every illusion. Encouragement disappears. Trusted people leave. The opportunities you expected never arrive despite years of patience. At first, these moments feel deeply unfair because they expose how much hope had been invested in circumstances beyond your control. Yet hidden inside disappointment is a lesson few people recognize while they are living through it. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Once every external source of certainty begins to fall away, something unexpected becomes possible. You are finally forced to ask yourself whether you can continue without it. That question shifts your attention away from everything you cannot control and toward the only thing that has always belonged to you: your response, your discipline, your willingness to act despite discomfort. This is where identity begins to change, not when success finally arrives, but when excuses begin losing their influence. The person who continues without an audience gradually becomes different from the person who only moved when someone was watching. The change is almost invisible at first. From the outside, nothing seems different for weeks, sometimes months. Yet beneath the surface, something far more valuable is taking shape. Every action completed without recognition weakens the need for recognition itself. Every promise kept without applause strengthens trust in your own word. Little by little, your relationship with yourself becomes more dependable than your relationship with approval. That is where genuine independence begins. Long before the world notices anything different, you already have. If these reflections help you see yourself and your own life with greater clarity, consider subscribing, not for quick motivation, but for timeless ideas that help you think more clearly, act more deliberately, and build a strength that no circumstance can take away. The moment outside support begins to disappear, something unusual happens that very few people expect. At first, the silence feels uncomfortable because it removes all the familiar distractions that once occupied your attention. There are fewer opinions telling you what to do, fewer voices offering reassurance, and fewer opportunities to convince yourself that your next step depends on someone else's involvement. What remains is the one place many people spend their entire lives trying not to visit: their own mind. For a while, this feels less like freedom and more like exposure. The absence of guidance forces you to notice thoughts that had always been hidden beneath constant activity. You begin to recognize how often hesitation dressed itself as caution, how frequently fear disguised itself as careful planning, and how many delays were quietly justified by circumstances that were never the true obstacle. Without the noise of constant validation, there is nowhere left to place responsibility except within yourself. And that realization can feel unsettling before it becomes liberating. Most people assume that loneliness is difficult because there is no one nearby. In reality, loneliness becomes difficult because it removes the escape routes that keep a person from confronting themselves. As long as the world remains loud, it is remarkably easy to blame the environment. There is always another distraction, another conversation, another reason to postpone difficult reflection until tomorrow. Silence interrupts that pattern. It does not accuse you or demand anything from you. It simply reveals what has been there all along. This is why so many people instinctively reach for constant stimulation whenever they are left alone. They fill every empty moment with music, videos, messages, or endless scrolling, not because these things are harmful in themselves, but because uninterrupted silence often begins exposing truths they are not ready to acknowledge. The Stoics understood that the mind becomes clearest when it is no longer running from itself. They deliberately created moments of stillness because they knew peace could never be found by endlessly escaping inward discomfort. When that stillness settles, excuses begin losing their strength. The stories you once repeated so confidently start sounding different when no one else is there to reinforce them. You may discover that waiting for the perfect opportunity was often another way of avoiding the possibility of failure. You may realize that claiming you needed more confidence actually meant you wanted certainty before taking action. Even the belief that you lacked enough support begins to shift under closer examination. Support may have been absent, but perhaps the greater obstacle was the quiet habit of postponing responsibility until life felt easier. None of these realizations are pleasant in the beginning. They ask you to abandon explanations that once protected your self-image. Yet this discomfort is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that you are finally seeing yourself without the comforting filters that made every delay appear reasonable. There is another layer to this process that often remains hidden until enough time has passed. As excuses begin disappearing, fear becomes easier to recognize for what it truly is. Fear rarely announces itself directly. More often it appears disguised as perfectionism, endless preparation, excessive caution, or the constant search for one more piece of information before beginning. These disguises feel intelligent because they sound responsible, yet they often accomplish the same outcome. Nothing changes. The Stoics never suggested eliminating fear because they understood it belongs to human nature. Instead, they refused to grant fear the authority to make decisions on their behalf. Once you recognize its voice, it gradually loses its ability to quietly direct your life from the shadows. It still exists, but it no longer speaks with unquestioned authority. Something remarkable begins happening as this inner conversation grows more honest. The silence that once felt heavy slowly becomes familiar. Instead of fearing your own thoughts, you begin listening to them with greater patience. As Socrates famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. You notice patterns repeating themselves, emotional reactions appearing under similar conditions, and beliefs inherited from other people that no longer deserve a place in your life. This kind of understanding cannot be borrowed from books or given by mentors. Others may point toward it, but only sustained reflection allows it to become your own. That is why dependence quietly loses its appeal. You stop searching for someone to explain who you are because you are finally doing that work yourself. Most people never reach this point because they spend their lives staying just busy enough to avoid it. They move from one obligation to another, one distraction to the next, filling every quiet space before deeper questions have the chance to surface. On the outside, they appear productive. Internally, they remain strangers to themselves. Yet the person who endures the discomfort of honest reflection discovers something far more valuable than temporary comfort. They begin building a relationship with their own mind based not on illusion but on truth. That truth is rarely dramatic. It unfolds gradually through ordinary moments of observation, small acts of discipline, and repeated choices to remain present instead of escaping discomfort. Long before the world notices any visible success, a quieter transformation has already begun. The person who once feared being left alone gradually becomes someone who no longer fears meeting themselves, and that single change becomes the foundation upon which every lasting achievement is eventually built. There comes a point when the absence of support stops feeling like a temporary setback and begins revealing something much more important. You realize there is no one left to blame. At first, that realization can feel painfully unfair. It seems as though other people have advantages you never received. They were encouraged when they doubted themselves. They had mentors who corrected their mistakes, families who believed in them, friends who reminded them not to quit. Looking at your own path, it may appear that every important lesson had to be learned through failure alone. It is natural to feel resentment toward circumstances that seem unequal. Many people remain trapped there for years, replaying the same comparisons until they become part of their identity. Yet comparison changes nothing. It does not make yesterday different, and it cannot build tomorrow. Eventually, life presents a truth that cannot be argued with. Whether your beginning was fair or unfair, you are still the one responsible for deciding what happens next. That realization is not comfortable, but it is the first moment real freedom becomes possible, because responsibility begins where excuses lose their influence. For someone who has spent years waiting for support, this change can feel unfamiliar. Waiting creates the illusion of movement while demanding very little courage. Acting is different. Action removes the comfort of possibility and replaces it with responsibility. Every decision becomes your own. Every mistake belongs to you. Every improvement comes through effort rather than expectation. At first, this feels heavier because there is no one left to absorb disappointment on your behalf. Yet there is another side to that weight. Every step taken through your own choice begins strengthening something that approval never could. Confidence no longer comes from hearing encouraging words. It begins growing from repeated evidence that you can depend on yourself. Every promise you keep, every difficult task you complete, every uncomfortable conversation you choose not to avoid quietly reshapes the way you see yourself. Long before success becomes visible, self-respect begins taking root, and that foundation is far more durable than confidence borrowed from praise. Many people misunderstand responsibility because they confuse it with self-blame. They believe accepting responsibility means carrying guilt for everything that has happened to them. The Stoics argued for something entirely different. Responsibility is not agreeing that every hardship was deserved. It is recognizing that your response belongs to you, regardless of how unfair the situation may be. This distinction matters because it protects the mind from becoming trapped between bitterness and helplessness. You can acknowledge that life has been difficult without allowing difficulty to become your identity. You can admit that opportunities were limited without deciding that your future must remain limited as well. Acceptance is not surrender. It is the refusal to waste precious energy arguing with realities that cannot be changed. Once reality is accepted, attention naturally shifts toward action because action is the only place where influence still exists. As this understanding deepens, your relationship with effort begins changing in subtle ways. You no longer wait to feel completely confident before beginning because confidence is no longer the requirement for action. You stop measuring progress by immediate results and start measuring it by consistency. Some days will still feel discouraging. Some efforts will fail despite your best intentions. The difference is that failure no longer becomes evidence that you should stop. It becomes information that helps you adjust your direction. The emotional highs and lows that once dictated your behavior gradually lose their authority because your commitment is no longer built upon temporary feelings. It is built upon deliberate choice, repeated often enough that discipline becomes more familiar than hesitation. Something remarkable emerges from this process that many people never expect. Responsibility, which first appeared heavy, slowly becomes a source of relief. There is peace in no longer depending on circumstances to determine whether you continue. There is freedom in realizing that your next step belongs entirely to you, regardless of how uncertain the future appears. The world may remain unpredictable. Support may come or never come. Recognition may arrive years later or not at all. Yet none of those possibilities possess the power they once held, because your direction no longer depends upon them. Energy that was once scattered across resentment, comparison, and expectation begins gathering around deliberate action instead. That quiet redirection changes more than behavior. It changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting for life to become easier and begin recognizing yourself as someone capable of moving forward under any condition. That is the kind of strength no circumstance can give and no circumstance can take away. The more responsibility becomes part of your life, the more clearly you begin to see something that once felt impossible to understand. Difficulties do not disappear simply because your mindset changes. Rejection still hurts. Delays still test your patience. Failure still carries disappointment. The difference is no longer found in the events themselves, but in the meaning you assign to them. Before, every obstacle seemed like evidence that something was wrong with your path. Every setback appeared to confirm that other people were simply more fortunate, more talented, or more deserving. It felt as though life itself was quietly telling you to stop. But as your perspective matures, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps these moments are not interrupting your growth at all. Perhaps they are the very process through which growth takes place. This is one of the deepest lessons found within Stoicism. The obstacle does not merely stand in front of the path. Properly understood, it becomes part of the path itself. What once looked like resistance gradually reveals itself as training. Think about how physical strength is developed. No muscle grows by remaining comfortable. Every increase in strength begins with resistance. A weight heavy enough to challenge the body creates tiny tears within the muscle fibers. At first glance, that damage appears negative. Someone unfamiliar with training might believe the body is becoming weaker because it feels exhausted afterward. Yet those small moments of stress trigger the very process that allows the muscle to rebuild stronger than before. As Seneca observed, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Remove the resistance, and growth slows to a stop. Keep every movement effortless, and the body has no reason to adapt. The mind follows a remarkably similar pattern. Character does not become stronger because life remains easy. It becomes stronger because difficulty demands qualities that comfort never asks for. Patience develops when waiting becomes unavoidable. Courage appears when fear refuses to leave. Discipline grows when motivation disappears, but the work still needs to be done. Without resistance, these qualities remain ideas instead of becoming part of who you are. There is a subtle transformation that takes place when you begin viewing hardship through this lens. You stop asking whether every experience feels pleasant and begin asking whether it is shaping you into someone more capable. A rejection still disappoints you, but it no longer defines your worth. It becomes an opportunity to improve your approach, strengthen your patience, or remind yourself that another person's decision does not determine your value. Delays become opportunities to develop endurance instead of frustration. Even failure begins serving a different purpose. Instead of becoming a final verdict on your potential, It becomes honest feedback showing where growth is still needed. This perspective does not eliminate emotional pain. Stoicism never promised emotional numbness. It teaches something far more practical. Pain may arrive without invitation, but meaning remains within your control. The interpretation you choose determines whether adversity becomes a burden you carry forever or a teacher that eventually allows you to move forward with greater wisdom. As these experiences accumulate, something begins changing beneath the surface. You become less surprised by difficulty because you no longer view it as an exception. It becomes an expected part of meaningful progress. This shift creates remarkable stability because your motivation no longer rises and falls with circumstances. Good days remain welcome, but difficult days lose their power to completely derail your direction. You recognize that every challenge is exercising something invisible within you, much like resistance strengthens muscles that cannot grow without effort. Gradually, setbacks stop interrupting your journey and begin refining it. You become slower to panic, quicker to adjust, and more willing to continue despite uncertainty. These qualities rarely attract attention from others, yet they quietly separate those who continue growing from those who remain trapped by every disappointment. Over time, the greatest reward is not the external success that may eventually follow, but the person you become while pursuing it. Every rejection survived without surrender leaves behind greater resilience. Every disappointment accepted without bitterness strengthens emotional balance. Every obstacle faced with deliberate action deepens self-respect because you have witnessed your own ability to endure what once seemed impossible. Looking back, you begin realizing that many of the experiences you once wished to avoid became the very moments that shaped your character most profoundly. Had life been easier, you might have reached comfort sooner, but you would have remained dependent on comfort to feel secure. Instead, adversity slowly taught you something far more valuable. Real strength is not measured by how little resistance you encounter, but by the kind of person resistance allows you to become. The Stoics paid close attention to this part of human nature because they understood that emotions are powerful but temporary. They never argued that feelings should be ignored or denied. They recognized sadness, disappointment, anger, and fear as natural responses to life. The danger appeared only when those temporary experiences were allowed to become permanent authorities. A passing emotion can provide useful information, but it cannot always provide wise direction. If every decision is made in the middle of fear, fear eventually begins shaping an entire life. If every action depends upon feeling inspired, progress becomes unpredictable because inspiration rarely arrives on command. The Stoic response was remarkably practical. Feel what you feel, observe it honestly, but do not surrender your judgment to it. Allow emotion to exist without handing it the steering wheel. That small distinction creates an enormous difference because it separates awareness from obedience. This is why emotional discipline is not emotional suppression. Suppression pushes feelings into the background while pretending they no longer exist. Eventually, they return with even greater intensity because nothing has actually been understood. Discipline takes a different path. It notices frustration without becoming consumed by it. It recognizes fear without allowing fear to write the next chapter. It accepts disappointment while continuing to move in a meaningful direction. That process requires patience because the mind rarely changes overnight. Some mornings confidence arrives naturally. Other mornings every step feels unusually difficult. The disciplined person does not expect perfect emotional balance every day. Instead, they refuse to let temporary imbalance permanently interrupt worthwhile action. They understand that consistency is built through ordinary choices repeated under changing emotional conditions. Over time, this changes the relationship you have with yourself. You stop demanding that every task feel easy before beginning it. You stop interpreting discomfort as a warning that you should immediately retreat. Instead, you become curious about your own reactions. Why does this challenge create resistance? Why does this criticism remain in your thoughts longer than necessary? Why does uncertainty feel so threatening today? These reflections are not meant to encourage endless analysis. They simply create enough distance between feeling and action for wisdom to enter the conversation. That small pause often prevents emotions from becoming impulsive behavior. Within that pause, freedom quietly grows because your response becomes intentional instead of automatic. There is something deeply reassuring about discovering that emotional stability is not a personality trait reserved for a fortunate few. It is a skill developed through repeated practice. Every difficult conversation handled calmly strengthens it. Every disappointment accepted without abandoning your principles deepens it. Every day you continue working, despite fluctuating motivation, reinforces it. Gradually, the emotional storms that once controlled your direction begin losing their authority. They still arrive, but they no longer remain in command. You become less interested in eliminating uncomfortable feelings and more interested in ensuring they do not determine the quality of your decisions. That shift creates remarkable steadiness because your life is no longer organized around chasing pleasant emotions and escaping unpleasant ones. As this steadiness becomes familiar, another quiet transformation begins. Consistency stops feeling like an act of force and starts becoming part of your character. You show up whether confidence is high or low. You continue learning whether progress feels fast or painfully slow. You honor commitments even when enthusiasm temporarily disappears. From the outside, these actions appear ordinary, yet they are supported by something extraordinary. Your behavior is no longer dependent upon your emotional weather. It is guided by values that remain stable, while feelings naturally rise and fall. That is why consistency cannot be created through motivation alone. Motivation comes and goes with changing circumstances. Emotional discipline quietly fills the space it leaves behind. Eventually, you realize that the greatest benefit of standing alone was never the absence of support itself. It was the opportunity to discover that calm, clear judgment could become stronger than passing emotion. The world continues changing. Success and disappointment continue taking turns. Some days still feel lighter than others, yet beneath those changing experiences, something remains remarkably steady. You trust yourself to continue. You trust yourself to think before reacting. You trust yourself to act according to principle rather than impulse. The Stoics understood that confidence built upon praise is remarkably unstable because praise belongs to other people. They may admire you today and misunderstand you tomorrow. They may celebrate your success while it benefits them and lose interest once your path no longer serves their expectations. If your peace depends on remaining admired, then your peace is no longer yours to protect. It has been placed in someone else's hands. This is why Stoicism encourages a different foundation altogether. Rather than asking whether others recognize your progress, it asks whether you recognize your own character becoming stronger. That question changes everything because it shifts attention away from reputation and toward conduct. Reputation fluctuates according to public opinion. Conduct remains within your own control. One belongs to chance, the other belongs to deliberate choice. The more often you return to this distinction, the less influence temporary approval begins to hold over your emotional life. This change rarely happens all at once. At first, you still notice when someone praises your work or questions your ability. The difference is that those reactions stop becoming final verdicts. Instead of immediately believing every compliment or every criticism, you begin comparing them against something quieter and far more reliable. You ask yourself whether you remained faithful to your principles, whether you gave honest effort, whether you acted with integrity even when no one was watching. These questions slowly replace the endless search for validation because they measure something external opinions cannot fully understand. Another person can judge the outcome of your work, but only you know the discipline required to produce it. They can criticize the result while remaining completely unaware of the growth that occurred during the process. Once this becomes clear, praise loses some of its power, but so does criticism. Neither one is allowed to define the person you are becoming. This deeper confidence is built in surprisingly ordinary moments. It does not appear during grand achievements as often as people imagine. More frequently, it grows through promises so small that almost no one notices them. Waking up when you said you would, finishing a task despite not feeling motivated, speaking honestly when a lie would have been easier, remaining patient during frustration instead of reacting impulsively. These actions seem insignificant on their own, yet together they create something extraordinary. Every time you keep your word to yourself, your mind quietly gathers evidence that you can be trusted. Trust, after all, is never created through declarations. It grows through consistency. The same principle that strengthens relationships with other people also strengthens your relationship with yourself. If you repeatedly abandon your own commitments, your confidence naturally weakens because your mind no longer believes your intentions. But when your actions regularly match your decisions, self-respect begins forming beneath the surface. There is also an unexpected freedom that arrives when your confidence no longer depends on constant recognition. You stop feeling pressured to prove yourself in every conversation. You become less interested in winning arguments simply to protect your image. Success is no longer measured by how many people acknowledge your effort, but by whether your effort remains aligned with the person you wish to become. This quiet shift changes the way you move through the world. Criticism still reaches you, but it no longer enters as deeply because your identity is anchored somewhere more stable. Praise still feels pleasant, yet it becomes a gift rather than a necessity. You appreciate encouragement without becoming dependent upon it. In many ways, this is the beginning of emotional freedom because your direction is no longer redirected every time public opinion changes. As the months and years pass, these small promises continue shaping your identity in ways that are almost invisible day by day, but undeniable in retrospect. The person who once doubted every decision gradually becomes someone who trusts their own judgment. The need to seek reassurance before every important step slowly fades because experience has replaced uncertainty. Not every choice will be correct, and Stoicism never promises perfection. Mistakes remain part of every meaningful life. The difference is that failure no longer destroys your confidence because your confidence was never built upon flawless outcomes. It was built upon your willingness to stand up after each setback and continue acting according to your values. That kind of confidence survives disappointment because disappointment cannot erase the discipline that created it. Eventually, you begin noticing something remarkable. The approval you once chased so desperately no longer feels as important as it did before. It has not become meaningless, but it has found its proper place. As Epictetus reminded us, if you seek to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. You no longer need another person to confirm your worth before believing in your own potential. Every promise kept to yourself has quietly replaced another piece of that old dependence. Every act of consistency has strengthened an inner foundation that criticism cannot easily shake and praise no longer controls. What remains is not loud confidence or endless certainty, but something far steadier, a quiet conviction that regardless of what the world chooses to say tomorrow, you can continue trusting the person you are becoming because that trust has been built one honest choice at a time. At the end of this journey, something unexpected begins to reveal itself. The goal was never to become someone who no longer appreciated support. Encouragement, friendship, and genuine loyalty remain some of life's greatest gifts. The difference is that they stop becoming requirements for your progress. Earlier, every important decision seemed tied to another person's response. You needed reassurance before taking risks, agreement before trusting your instincts, and recognition before believing your efforts mattered. Without realizing it, your direction was constantly being negotiated with the outside world. Every opinion carried the power to slow you down or push you forward. Every criticism demanded emotional recovery before you could continue. Every absence of support felt like proof that the path itself must be wrong. Gradually, however, all the experiences that once seemed unfair begin producing a completely different result. They teach you how to continue even when nobody is standing beside you. What first appeared to be abandonment slowly reveals itself as preparation. This is where genuine independence begins. It is often misunderstood because people imagine independence means isolation or emotional distance. The Stoics never argued that human beings should reject meaningful relationships. They understood that we are naturally connected to one another and that kindness, cooperation, and friendship enrich life. Their teaching was aimed somewhere much deeper. They wanted a person whose judgment remained steady even when approval disappeared. Someone capable of accepting advice without becoming dependent upon it. Someone grateful for encouragement without collapsing in its absence. This distinction changes everything because it allows relationships to become expressions of mutual respect instead of sources of emotional survival. You no longer cling to people because you fear losing yourself without them. Instead, you choose relationships freely because your sense of direction already exists within you. Freedom is not the absence of connection, it is the absence of dependence. As this inner stability grows, something else quietly fades away. The constant urge to convince everyone that you are right begins losing its importance. Earlier, disagreement often felt personal because your identity depended upon being understood. If someone doubted your decisions, you doubted them as well. If your efforts went unnoticed, you questioned whether they were worthwhile at all. Now the relationship with criticism changes. You still listen because wisdom can arrive from unexpected places, but you no longer confuse every opinion with objective truth. You examine it calmly, keep what is useful, and leave behind what does not belong to your path. People often imagine strength as something loud and unmistakable. They picture confidence announcing itself through certainty, dominance, or endless determination. Real strength usually appears much quieter. It is visible in the person who continues working long after attention has disappeared. It is found in the individual who remains honest despite receiving no immediate reward for honesty. It lives in the ability to remain patient while progress unfolds more slowly than expected. These moments rarely attract applause because they happen in ordinary days that nobody else notices. Yet this is precisely where character is formed. Every unseen act of discipline reinforces the understanding that your life no longer depends upon an audience. The world may celebrate your success someday, or it may remain completely unaware of your efforts. Either possibility becomes acceptable because your commitment has stopped depending on recognition. The work itself becomes enough. Looking back, many of the experiences you once wished had never happened begin appearing in a different light. The loneliness that once felt unbearable taught you how to enjoy your own company. The rejection that once damaged your confidence forced you to discover confidence that could not be taken away by another person's opinion. The delays that once filled you with frustration developed patience that immediate success never could have provided. Even disappointment begins making sense because it repeatedly invited you to separate temporary emotion from lasting direction. None of these lessons felt valuable while they were unfolding. Most appeared as obstacles, interruptions, or evidence that life had become unfair. Only with time do you begin recognizing that they were quietly shaping the very qualities you admire most in yourself today. They demanded resilience before resilience existed. They asked for courage before courage felt possible. In answering those demands, you became someone entirely different. This is why the absence of support carries such unexpected power. It removes the illusion that someone else will eventually build your life for you. It forces decisions that comfort endlessly postpones. It introduces you to fears that can only be overcome through direct experience. Most importantly, it teaches you that the strongest foundation is not built through ideal circumstances, but through repeated choices made under imperfect ones. Every difficult season becomes another opportunity to prove that your direction belongs to you. Not because the journey has become easy, but because your commitment has become stronger than the conditions surrounding it. Once that happens, uncertainty loses much of its ability to intimidate. You stop measuring your future by the amount of encouragement available and begin measuring it by the strength of your own resolve. The irony is impossible to ignore. At the beginning, it seemed as though support was the missing ingredient standing between you and the life you wanted. Everything appeared to depend on finding the right people, the right opportunity, or the right moment. Yet the further you travel, the more clearly you see that constant support might have delayed the very transformation you needed most. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Had someone always carried your doubts, solved your problems, or rescued you from discomfort, you might never have discovered what you were capable of enduring on your own. The strength you searched for was never hidden inside another person's approval. It was slowly being forged every time you continued without it. Every lonely decision, every quiet act of discipline, every promise kept without recognition was shaping an inner foundation that no external circumstance could ever provide. That is the quiet truth waiting at the end of this path. Success is not measured by finally surrounding yourself with people who always believe in you. Those people are a blessing when they appear, but they are not the source of your direction. The real victory arrives when your purpose remains steady, whether others applaud, criticize, encourage, or walk away entirely. You become someone who appreciates support without requiring it, welcomes praise without depending on it, and accepts solitude without fearing it. The absence that once seemed like your greatest disadvantage becomes the very condition that allowed genuine strength to emerge. In the end, nothing essential was missing after all. The silence, the uncertainty, and the moments of standing completely alone were never signs that life had forgotten you. They were quietly teaching you to become the one person you would always need beside you. Strength was never waiting for the right people to appear. It was quietly growing every time you chose to move forward without them. The greatest victory is not proving yourself to the world. It is becoming someone who no longer needs the world's permission to become who they were meant to be. If this message resonated with you, continue your journey by watching one of the videos on your screen. Each one explores another timeless Stoic principle that can help you build greater clarity, discipline, and inner peace. Thank you for being part of the Stoic Journal. Until next time, take care of your mind and keep walking your path with quiet strength.